Welcome everyone to the community conversation with our Bakersfield Police Department. My name is Arleana Waller. I am the founder of ShePower Leadership Academy and the founder of the MLK Community Initiative. And this conversation sparked with Chief Terry because I've gotten to know a little bit of his heart, and I do believe from the bottom of my heart he has a heart for our community. And I think none of us can deny the fact that there are issues. And when we look at the surrounding events that's going on, this is a global pandemic on racism. And we have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it head on. So I was able to invite a panel of guests so that we can have this discussion. We have some of our elected officials that are present. But at the base of this conversation, we want to have this conversation with Chief Terry. As it surrounds my thoughts, I am a mother to 2 African-American sons. So this is a very personal matter for me. And seeing the death of Mr. Floyd live was traumatizing in a way that I don't know if I've experienced trauma. And I spent weeks weeping. And I felt like we needed to do something. And I have sat and I have waited to see if someone would take a stand. We see the protesters, and I stand with peaceful protesters. But I said, what else can we do? And I thought, let's just get to the heart of the matter. Let's talk to the man in charge. And so that's how we got here. Chief Terry, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you for trusting this process. You never asked for questions to be submitted to you ahead of time. Your statement was heartfelt. I believe with everything in me that you desire to close the gap in our community as it relates to race and relationships. But how do we do it? And so we believe that this is a start of something. It's definitely not going to answer all the questions, but it is definitely a start. So we will have an opportunity to introduce our panel. We will go into a Q&A. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Terry. He will welcome you and introduce you to his officer that's on the phone with us today.
Good afternoon, Arlena, and I want to thank you very much for reaching out on this really important topic, not just because of recent events, but because it's an important topic that affects the lives of every community member. I watched, like the rest of the world, that video and had the visceral reaction. The death was horrific. And what took place and the behaviors displayed in that video were difficult to watch and are unacceptable in our society, and certainly unacceptable in policing. It has no place. But then I thought, okay, what do I do with this? I was heartbroken for his family. I was heartbroken for the community. I was just heartbroken that our system and our society is that broken. And so what do I do with it? And so I'm so very happy to have Assistant Chief Mullens on staff here because he and I talked about it on Tuesday, the next day. And we directed staff to begin our training staff, who does the training on arrest control and defensive tactics and how to arrest someone. We wanted our staff to see it. We wanted them to take that and have a conversation with every officer and tell them and reinforce for them my expectation that what's observed on that video is unacceptable and that our training, it certainly didn't involve any tactic like that and does not, but that it was important for us to have that immediate conversation with our staff so that they would hear directly from me on how I felt about that and the message that I wanted them to have. But I will tell you also, my heart was warmed as conversations spread throughout the department about that video, that I saw many of the men and women who I've had conversations with had the same reaction I did. This is a wonderful community. And I think we've seen that displayed over the last several days in terms of the protest, in terms of people having their voices heard. We've not experienced a lot of the other problems associated with the protest in other communities, in other cities, and other states. That's because that's not who our people are and our citizens are. And the vast majority of the people who have come together in front of the police department over the last several days have had their voices and expressed themselves in a way that I think is admirable. And the way that they've conducted this, yeah, we've seen some problems, and there has been some vandalism, there has been assault, but I've seen community members intervene and stop that from happening so that there would not be a distraction, so that the message that is trying to be shared is heard. And so that's a little bit of where my heart is. I am the new police chief. I'm proud to be the police chief of this community and this department. As I said earlier, we have wonderful men and women who have a heart for service in this department. Are there problems? Yes, there are. We're human beings. Can we improve? Can we get better? Yes. I feel very strongly in community policing as a philosophy. I will and am making plans to carry on and enhance what Chief Martin started over the last 3 years in transforming the culture of this department to service. Yes, there are times when things are very difficult and very dangerous and have to be dealt with. And there are criminals in our society and in our community that need to be arrested. But that is not everybody, and that is not the vast majority of our communities. And so much of our job is service. And that is at the heart of where I want us as an organization to go. We're going to be growing over the next several years. Even with this next budget year, we're getting some additional positions at management and command level that will enable us to structure the department in a way that will help us to implement community policing in a more effective way. We're going to be able to establish partnerships with the community, more of them, and strengthen the ones that we do have so that we can have more conversations like this to solve real issues that are at the heart of what our community's concerns are. A very important component of community policing is not just to have the chief and the assistant chief and captains say that we're involved in community policing, that we have conversations with community members. We need the men and women who are driving the black and whites to have that same connection, to have the freedom and the responsibility to engage our community with conversations, to solve real issues. So you're going to be hearing from us more. You're going to be hearing from us in different ways, and more of us involved in those communications out in the neighborhood. We haven't done a good enough job informing our community of all the different things that we are doing. A lot of what the community is expressing is real. We're working on many of those things, but we've not sufficiently shared. And so that distrust gap is not able to be filled because we've left a void. We haven't communicated well enough. And so it is my desire going forward that as we build and grow this community or grow the department, that we connect in a real way and truly begin to solve the problems that are the concerns of our community. And so I look forward today to really hearing the community's perspectives. And let's talk about some specific changes that the community wants to hear or wants to see. And we can find ways. We're not going to agree on everything. Some things we have constraints just based on the laws that are passed. As a chief of police, I have no ability to pass a law. And so there are a lot of system and structural things that the community wants to change that the police department has no control over whatsoever. And so, but then there are some things that we might disagree on the strategy or the effectiveness of certain things, but it doesn't prevent us from having a conversation. And so I will sum it up to say that going forward, community trust for me is about a relationship. And it is about us as a police department establishing a stronger relationship with the community. And we do that one by one, by transparency, by the release of information, by listening. And I look forward to, not just because of this issue, but look forward to healing in a broader way our community so that our community is safe, everyone is treated with dignity and respect, and given the opportunity to fulfill their dreams. And that pretty much sums it up in my opening.
Thank you, Chief Terry. I think that was very genuine and heartfelt. When you talk about system and structures, I'm going to share personal story before I go into the rules for today. Recently experiencing racism so hateful that I had to file a report. I work with your detectives, and you gave it full attention. And what we found out at the end of the day, no matter how we looked at the situation, the system did not protect me until either I was harmed or dead. And so we're here to figure out how do we do it. We're going to deal with our Congress. We're going to deal with our Senate. We're going to deal with our mayor. We're going to all work together and figure out how do we change this system to eliminate some of this racism. Because when we think about the system, it was actually, the police system was actually designed to rally and control the slaves. That's not the case anymore. You know, we don't have slaves. We don't have masters. So we know that it's time, and we appreciate your honesty in sharing that. House rules. Only the panelists and the moderators will be unmuted. We ask that in the chat room, you do not use foul language. You can put your questions there. We will be looking at your questions. We are at capacities. We're going to do our very best to get to as many as we can or to address as many as we can. If you want to continue these conversations, we will definitely be open to that, but we're actually going to be respectful. This is a sensitive time for everyone, and we have to all come to the table as peaceful and as graceful as we can to work through these issues. So we're actually that. The meeting will conclude at 3:00 to respect everyone's time. We're going to do a quick introduction. I'm going to just call your name and introduce yourself. Please be as brief as possible with as much information as possible. We'll start with Arnita Taylor.
Wow. My name is Arnita Willis Taylor, and I live in North Texas, in Keller, Texas. I am a friend of Arleana, and I co-authored a book with Bob Prater, who I think is on the call, and it's called A Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation, Creating Safe Environments to Talk About Politics, Religion, Sexuality, and Racism. And so we're all about healthy conversations, and I just admire and encourage you for what you're doing today. I am the mother of 2 African-American sons and an African-American husband, and so I do have a great deal of concern around the things that are happening on a national and international level. Thank you for having me.
Taylor. Tahlua Goosby.
Hi, Chief Terry and Chief Mullens. My name is Tahlua Goosby. I was actually newly elected to the Kern County Democratic Central Committee, and I represent District 1. I am also a mental health therapist in Kern County. And Chief Terry, you may not know this, but I used to work with Tom Corson, so I have heard your name before at the Dream Center. So I'm glad that I'm a part of this panel. Thank you, Arleana.
You're welcome. Traco Matthews.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Chief Terry, for being willing to participate in this type of discussion. I think this is a great step forward. I am the HR Director at KCSOS. However, I wanted to be clear that in this capacity, in this role, I am speaking personally and as a social pastor. That is another hat that I wear. And so I am a Black male, and so I fear for myself. When I see these things happen, I have my own stories and experiences to share, but also I have a father and brothers and brother-in-laws and many nephews and nieces for whom I am concerned. And so I look forward to having this conversation and ultimately working together towards healing and greater collaboration.
Thank you so much. Keith Wolaridge.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chief, nice to meet you, sir. Most of you know me as trustee for the Panama Buena Vista Union School District. So I'm going to bring in educational questions for you, Chief. But again, I'm not speaking just like Traco on behalf of the district. I'm speaking as a concerned African-American male with 4 daughters. And I would hate to have another Sandra Bland incident happen concerning one of my girls. So I'm speaking on behalf, again, like Traco, as an African-American male who is in Bakersfield, who wants safety and justice for all. So again, not speaking on behalf of the district, but speaking on behalf of myself, sir.
Thank you. Mayor Kern Go.
Well, Karen Go, Mayor of the City of Bakersfield, thank you all so much for joining together. I too was horrified at the death, but I think we're together because the death and the heartbreak of Mr. Floyd is raising another issue. And That's what we're here to do, is to come together for action, to bring healing, to reconcile in humility. And so I join you, just as the mayor of the city of Bakersfield, in this journey forward. Thank you.
Chief Mullens.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Joe Mullens. I've been a police officer with the city of Bakersfield for 31 years. I grew up in Bakersfield. This is my hometown. This is my hometown police department. I'm not going to pretend that some of the problems we have in this city are not because of our historical way of doing business here. What I am not here to do today is to tell you that I have all the answers. If I did, in all honesty, things would be different. The fact is that I firmly believe where my heart is as Reverend Jeff Brown said, what you do for me, without me, you do to me. I believe that. I'm here to listen. I'm here to work with you, not to do things for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant Madden.
Yes, Clayton Madden, born and raised here in Bakersfield, police officer for 23 years now. I too am saddened, hurt, disappointed from the incident in Minnesota. I'm here to listen. I'm here to continue to work with our community because this is my community. My kids are here and I plan on being here forever. So thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Jackson.
Patrick Jackson, president of the NAACP Bakersfield branch. Definitely here. Appreciate the chief being on. Had a relationship with him prior to him becoming chief, and so definitely encouraged that we're going to be having this discussion, especially being under the tutelage of Chief Martin and the progressive thing that he's done and seeing these things progressively move forward. And as the mayor said, of course, this outcry that has happened of the murder of George Floyd breeds a long history from slavery up to now as to why we're having this major discussion and people are saying enough is enough and we need change. And understanding that our own county, we've had our own issues, being one of the most deadliest counties in the nation when it comes to police officers. And so this is not a new situation to our county and our city and our constituents and our people in our city. This is not the first outcry that we've had. And so by it being one of the deadliest counties, we want to ensure that I have 3 boys myself, being a Black male and so many other concerned citizens, that we will continue to have this dialogue. And from this dialogue, we will try to make sure that we have some sustainable changes that will come about with specific information of things that we will try to move forward with and try to make sure that we have those bullet points on support from each and every one of our leaders here. So thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman Rudy Salas. We'll come back. Okay, you're good?
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Arleana, for hosting this. I think this is a very important dialogue to have with the community and appreciate you and the group bringing this together. Obviously, I'm here to listen and to help with everything I can, like many of you. It's just this continued, Patrick just talked about it, this continued scenes that we see of injustice happening across the country. I do want to say at the state, we've tried to tackle some of this. I know the chief mentioned this in terms of laws. But last year, we passed the use of force bill law. It was by Assemblymember Weber, Assembly Bill 392. And then we also have Assembly Bill 243, which is like a refresher course on racial and identity profiling. So I'd like to maybe, Chief, later on in your comments, you could talk about how that's being implemented in the department. I think that might be useful for the community as well. And so I'm here to listen and be helpful in any which way I can. So thank you for hosting this.
You're welcome. Christina Laster.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for your attendance and participation. I am Christina Laster, a civil rights activist and humanitarian. I also am a nationwide and statewide community organizer. That being said, I am also a part of the MLK community initiative going forward, and I support.
Thank you. Prater.
Arleana, thank you for inviting me into this. Chief Terry. I appreciated your remarks. I'm a man with empathy. Along with Arnita Taylor and Wayne Jacobson, who co-authored a book called The Shack, we wrote this thing called A Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation. We are trying to change the narrative. And I'm hoping that today is less political and more real.
Right.
Yes. Thank you. Clarence Hosey.
Hello, my name is Clarence Hosey, born and raised here in Bakersfield, California. For you all that don't know me, I've gotten 18 years in law enforcement for the Kern County Sheriff's Department. First, let me thank Arleana for this, Chief Terry, Assistant Chief Mullens, Mayor Go, and Assemblyman Salas. I apologize. And I think this is a great start to a very, very ugly thing that happened the other day. And I also would like to thank Chief Terry for his words of his strong words out against this. I was hoping to see Sheriff Youngblood do the same thing, but I haven't seen it yet.
Thank you so much. Congress TJ Cox, we're just saying a couple quick words about who we are and why we're here.
No, thanks so much, Arlena, and the MLK Community Initiative, Police Chief Terry, for everyone here for participating in today's discussion. Thanks so much for inviting me. And the fact is that this is a national crisis because we have such a large and vital community in our country that's in real pain. They don't feel safe. They aren't safe, dignified, or seen. And most of all, they don't feel heard. I can tell you, though, we hear you. We're listening. And I just want to commend the efforts of the activist president, the city of Bakersfield, to get everyone to the table. We need to fix this together. Federal, state, local levels of government, all working with the community. We're standing ready to help in each and every way we can on the federal level and as a member of Congress. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. So we're going to kind of guide the conversation. You can ask your questions, or you can move along the conversation as we pose questions to you. This conversation is definitely a conversation between the community and the Bakersfield Police Department. And so we really want to be as honest as we can. We have so many people. They've submitted so many questions. We will not get to all of them, but we will do our very best. The first question I want to pose, and anyone can answer this question, what was your emotions when you saw Mr. Floyd murdered at the hands of a bad police officer? What was that like for you? And anyone can feel free to answer that.
Arlena, I would like to go.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I jumped right in front of you. I apologize for that, but I was mad. I was mad from the start. I saw that going on, and I thought, why are you doing that? And my anger changed to dismay because it went on and on and on. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. How can anybody think that's right? And then another officer showed up. Another officer showed up and didn't do anything. Didn't say stop, didn't grab him, didn't push him, shove him aside, didn't do anything about it. And then I came to realize there's two other cops on the man's lower body. And none of them said, stop what you're doing. None of them stepped in and said, we've seen other videos since then. We've seen video prior to that where officers stepped in and stopped that sort of behavior. And this went on and on. We can't look at that possibly. There's no way any decent human being can look at that and say that that's okay. There's no way that once that man went limp, you shouldn't have started life-saving efforts immediately. And yet, that's what we saw. And there's no way not to be dismayed and ashamed of how this sort of thing went on. Somebody said a minute ago, they used the words national crisis. This is not a national crisis because there are riots in the streets. This is a national crisis because there are members of our community, of our cities, that feel They have to be scared of this kind of thing. And that didn't happen on May 25th. That's been going on for a long time. There's a crisis. Let's work on that crisis together. Let's not wait for a riot.
I agree.
Yeah.
Tahlua?
As a former foster youth, I feel like I've been like fighting for my life since a very early age. Growing up in foster care, being in different people's homes, never having a real sense of belonging anywhere. When I seen that video, and also being a mother myself to a 6-year-old, I was frozen. You know how you have the fight, flight or freeze? The advocator in me was wanting to go out and do something. And then another piece of me, I didn't have any words. So while watching that, how long is this going to go on? What can we do as leaders in our own right, in our own community, at the places of employment that we work? What can we really do to really change this situation, change the system? We are all implicated in this racist system in America. And what can we do to fix it? So really, that's how I felt, was really frozen in past trauma, current trauma, reaching out to friends and family to kind of talk to them and express how I felt, crying, been crying for a few days, trying to understand really how can we make a change that's now, not tomorrow.
Okay. Anyone else?
Arleana, yeah, let me jump in. I was appalled, devastated, enraged, crying. I literally threw my phone down after I saw him pass in front of my eyes. I don't think I'd ever watched a person literally die. And it made me so just distraught to know that this was only the latest blow up in the moral crisis that our nation has been experiencing for 400 years. This is just the latest symptom. And that's really what devastated me, was knowing that as a Black man, it really doesn't matter how much power, money you have. This could be you. And so I threw my phone down in disgust.
Anyone else?
I have something to say. And so, basically, I have to say that I have an utter disappointment. And that disappointment comes from knowing that my grandfather and my father experienced the same thing, that now in 2020, where everyone says that we live in this great nation, I have to fear my son experiencing. And there hasn't been that cyclical generational change. Pushing for that cyclical generational change has been a tumultuous history here in America. And we have to be able to come like we are now and look at what is the forward movement. Even if we're the only ones in this community doing this thing and everyone else, other surrounding communities are not, that is what needs to be said. Also, very just sad that he is asking for his mother. That's me. He's asking for me. His mom's been dead for 2 years. So it really spoke to the heart and condition and disappointment of Black mothers everywhere. And so that's, what my sentiment is about the whole thing.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to that? I think there's a consensus that it was that moment, I think everyone around the world have showed that consensus. And I think for mothers of Black men, Black sons, we look local and we say, why is this still going on? Why? Is this something that our leaders truly want to fix? Or is this an economic advantage? These are the questions that I've been getting posed to me. Because if this is something that my father dealt with, his father dealt with, why are we still dealing with it? And I think every leader has to ask themselves that question, why? Chief Terry, I'm going to pose that to you. Why do you think we're still dealing with this in 2020?
I wish I knew. I think that there is a deficit in broader society of we've lost empathy. I wish I had an answer for that. Looking inside policing specifically, I think it's there's certainly a human component. We do hire from the human race. And so we hire people that come with varieties of experiences and biases and fears and all of those sorts of things. The work inside the police profession can be better. What do we do when we get somebody in the door? How do we expose them to the varieties of cultures and community members that they're here to serve? How do we properly inform them to be able to communicate, to be able to interpret, to understand history, to be the resource that the community needs at a very critical moment? So again, policing hasn't done enough. Basically, policing can come down to three things. We involve the law that we apply, that we interpret. There's policies that we go about interpreting and enforcing the law, and policies are really the directions on how we go about doing those things that aren't necessarily written in the law, but the way we want to operate. And then there's strategies or techniques that you use with policy development. And so all three of those areas, the law, policy, and techniques or strategies, are ways for us to improve this. And I want to look forward. And that's why I think it's been so important, this opportunity to hear from the community today, because I'm going to hear very specific things that the community feels. For far too long, the policing profession has decided what the community's needs are based on dots on a map, based on reports certain here or there. We've decided what the appropriate strategy is to reduce those dots, those incidents on a map. I had a conversation with a pastor earlier today, and he was talking about and kind of asking the question, does an officer transform when he puts a uniform on? Is there something about the psyche? Does the personality change when he's putting on the uniform? And I think it does to a certain extent, because you recognize what you're going to do. There's a physical presence of what you're going to go do. We have to train our men and women that are doing that to understand and put that in perspective. You're not being deployed into our neighborhoods. You're a part of our neighborhoods. We are a part of our community. And so why we're dealing with it is because we've never dealt with it. We've not made the changes that need to take place.
Appreciate that honesty.
Looking forward, we're going to make some changes. What we're hearing today, over this week, what I've heard over the last several days in specific conversations, quite frankly, what we've heard for years, it's time to make some changes. And I'm ready to do that.
Thank you. Anyone else want to address their ideas on change or propose their question?
I definitely would like to chime in on this. Only going to take a few minutes. I think it goes back to what Chief Cherry had stated, was that he goes off of the policies and procedures that they have. And the great thing that Rudy, Salas, and Congressman Cox is on here, because they go off of the documents and procedures that are presented to them, which is largely from the peace officer rights. And so when we're talking about change and implementation, it goes back to our children. You allow your children to get away with something, they do it more and more often. They become a bad teenager, a bad adult, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we look at bad police officers, they're hid behind these rights. And the reason why these officers were reprimanded quickly, because that department fired them. And so they had no protection under their unions and so forth. And so that's why we see the issues, even when we talk about here in Kern County, those officers that get in trouble are sat at a desk, they're hidden behind the police union, and they hide behind the laws that are presented to them. And so they continue these types of acts time and time again, because they can hide behind the law. And so if you can hide behind the law, those are the things that create the change that we need as a people. Slavery didn't change. Riots happened. All those things happened. Until the Emancipation Proclamation happened, slaves were free. So you cannot change anything until the policy change. And then when you have a zero tolerance policy that is put into place, then change can happen. Until then, this is all talk. This is all people coming together, just saying they got a lot of fluffy stuff, a lot of good things. But until we talk about people wanting to support a policy that changes the peace officer rights, then you're on the same table as us at the community.
Thank you, Patrick.
I would like to follow that question up, Patrick's. Chief Terry, you stated something particular. You said that these officers are not to be deployed into our community. Is that correct?
Yeah, I said in the context of the conversation with the pastor, it was like they become militarized and like you're going to battle or something. And he was sort of asking, does that happen? Does a personality change? Does the uniform have an effect? And so that's what I was referring to.
So I had a good conversation with my friend Ralph, and he stated to me when he was going through a training process to be hired on in law enforcement, he noted that the hiring pool consisted of many individuals who were former military. So specifically around hiring practices, how is BPD willing to change the way in which they hire?
Are you asking that we shouldn't hire? Are you asking that we shouldn't hire military people, or what do you mean by?
I'm just asking, how do you feel about his statement, and how do you feel about your statement when you stated that we're not deploying these people out into our community, but if some of these people who are being hired on are used to being deployed, are used to participating in military activities, how do you account for their behavior not being changed when they do come into contact with the community?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a variety of training would be necessary to talk about the psychological training, to talk about policies that are in place to specifically to require certain behaviors, accountability and oversight within the department. There are a variety of things that we do in the hiring process. There, like I said, there is psychological training, there's polygraphs, there's a variety of those kinds of things that you can get to the heart of some of these views.
Is there a specific policy? Because I do know that, people who have military experience are looked at favorably, when applying.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I'm struggling a little bit to get to the heart of what your question is, because you talked about a change in the policy, the hiring practices, and I want to learn and understand what do you mean by change, or what suggestion are you saying that there should be to change the hiring practice with regard to military?
I guess my suggestion would be to probably look at those who are being hired with military background a little bit more closely, and probably asking more questions regarding their experience while in the field. I don't know in particular because I'm not a part of law enforcement, but I know that is something people do worry about.
Well, every person that goes through the hiring practice or hiring process with the police department goes through they go through psychological testing in a written form. Then they go through a interview with a psychologist. So I guess I would ask you, are there some other things that you think would be appropriate, proper screening methods that we might use beyond that to help deal with the issue that you're trying to raise?
At this time, I don't have a suggestion for that. Do you, Traco?
So I'm not sure that screening will do so much. At this point, I believe that external accountability is what is key. If you want to get healthier, you get a coach. If you want to get better at something, you hire someone external to your system to get better at it. The research shows that you have a 90 to 95% chance of executing effectively on your strategies when you bring someone else into the equation and you're transparent about your objectives, your goals, whether they're for hiring or for reducing racial profiling. I have some ideas about how we might do that. And the big one is this. Would it be possible to establish an advisory committee that provides external, I don't want to say oversight, but accountability, where they meet on a monthly basis? And the goal ultimately will be to have an annual report that is published for the community from BPD or any other law enforcement agency that wants to use the template. And it speaks to everything that we're concerned about. So racial profiling, What are the number of total stops that are done on a monthly basis with demographic breakdowns? Total vehicle searches with demographic breakdowns, total arrest with racial demographic breakdowns, use of force, how many people were potentially shot, killed, et cetera, racial demographic breakdown. When you have that type of external accountability, behaviors change. So I think what this moral crisis, the one that we just watched from a week ago, is demanding is more direct action. Because I know steps have been taken over the last few years, and they're good steps to engage with the community. I know that Chief Lyle Martin did a lot of good work. I helped with some of that work. I know that Clayton Madden, I've seen him and others at the Police Activities League and engaging with the community. But at the end of the day, a moral crisis demands action, direct action, behavioral change. And the best way to adjust behaviors, this is in the corporate world and in our lives, is to get coaching, to get external oversight and accountability. I think that it is critical that something comes from these conversations to that effect.
So I want to add this from the group. Someone in the group added to your comment, they said per officer. So it's not a lump. We're able to identify the officer that is bad and get them out of there, because that bad officer is not only dangerous to our community, but it's also dangerous to the officer because it puts the good officers in the line of fire. Another thing that came from the question, it says, and this is probably really dealing with Congress, TJ Cox, because all of them have responsibility in this. This does not just, fall on the shoulders of the policemen here today. It says, is there or can you create a national database of officers who've used excessive force and ban their hiring? And Chief Terry, is there anything like that in place?
No, they cannot. They cannot. I'm gonna tell you why. It goes back to what I stated about the peace officer rights. They cannot. They can't even state that the reason why they fired them. They have certain rights in the peace officer rights that does not allow them to disclose particular information about a specific officer.
So you mean to tell me you can disclose the information? Hold on, you can disclose the information about a murderer
Arleana,
on the streets? Okay, Chief Mullens.
If I can address what that hiring process looks like any other employee, a typical inquiry is whether or not somebody's eligible for rehire. And that's what it comes down to. Is somebody eligible for rehire or not? So in the circumstance where somebody is fired for misconduct, the answer would obviously be no. But what is often ignored when people talk about the peace officer selection and hiring process is that any responsible police department requires an applicant to sign a waiver of every single one of those rights. We send a background investigator, somebody is an applicant from another agency, we send an investigator, a background investigator to that agency to look through their personnel file. If they don't sign a waiver, if that applicant will not sign a waiver so we can see their personnel file and every internal investigation that they were under when they left there, we don't hire them. Right. No responsible police department should be hiring an applicant that they cannot see their background. I'm not going to pretend that I've never heard of it happening. I'm not going to pretend that it hasn't happened in Kern County, but I will absolutely tell you that I would never authorize the hiring of an officer who's hiding something in their personnel background or in their personnel file or anywhere in their background. I'd like to talk about some of the things that I see in the chat, in the comments. That comes up quite a bit as far as us looking at officers' social media. Officers have a right to free speech as much as anybody else, but they are also accountable for that free speech. And anything that's being said out there that is of a racist slant or homophobic or something that's being put out there that implies that the officers advocate depriving somebody of their civil rights, they're accountable for that behavior and they're going to be held accountable. Same thing for the applicants. If they won't sign a waiver, if we can't see that personnel file, they aren't coming to work here, period.
And Arleana, again, it goes back to the question wasn't answered. Will the community be able to see it? And that answer is no. It's the police department can see it, but the community, you cannot pinpoint an officer, their name and their file of what they've done. And so that question specifically can the community see it?
I want to answer that question. I do want to answer that question. I don't ever want to have anybody pretend that we're trying to dodge that fact. The law in California is that every public employee, and it's not just police officers, that their file is confidential unless there's a very specific reason for somebody to see it. There are attorneys here online, and they can explain the process for a pitches motion better than I can. But do those things exist? Yeah. Is it possible for anybody to walk in and file a Freedom of Information Act request for a police officer's personnel file? No, they're not. It's not possible right now under the law. Whether or not we want to advocate for that to be different, I personally have no opposition to it, but I don't control that. Mr. Jackson, I appreciate your concerns on that, and I absolutely think that's something that ought to be considered. I do think that was brought up a little bit ago. I think Mr. Matthews mentioned the concept of a database, the licensing of police officers, a statewide licensing at least, and the ability to remove the license from somebody who's entitled to be a peace officer. I can't imagine. Right at this moment, I don't understand why we don't have that system in place in California.
I want to say, Chief Mullens, I've been to, and I think everyone on here, I want to encourage you to take the policing class. I sat under Chief Mullens in that class, and it was a game changer for me on how I deal with police officers. I was able to hear things that I've never heard before. So your honesty that you bring here, I've seen it, I've experienced it, and I appreciate it. So I think we've got some work to do, but I don't want to take all the time. Anyone else want to come? We have a lot of great questions in the chat.
Yes, I want to say something. And so I want to go back to what Traco said, which I think is very important. We do not miss. And there should be a Citizens Advisory Commission or Council. Yet at the same time, having that external person or entity that is an accountability partner per se, even if it is with taking it out of the hands of the local DA's jurisdiction and putting it in the hands of the general attorney, because what I'm hearing basically is that people don't feel that there has been an impact or change from what has taken place. And see, this is the problem when you have all of these measures and protocols in place, such as psychological testing, unconscious bias training, but it's not trickling back down to the community. The community, I feel, is able to do a pretty good job without over-policing, know their policing needs, and able to reflect those through a commission on advisory. But at the same time, if you aren't willing to listen, and I'm not saying that you guys aren't, but then there will be some accountability that has to be external. And what is that going to look like? That's going to be from the community side. So I do agree with what Traco is saying. And at the same time, moving forward with looking at how the community can basically tell you what their policing needs are and be listened to. The problem with unconscious bias training and psychiatric evaluations are that things are missed. Unconscious bias training, you really don't have a way to measure the results in that. The felt impact is from the people that are speaking out from the community that that's not working.
Well, there is a set of tests called implicit access tests that register what your brain has registered over your life about certain people groups. And it is a metric. We can say, yeah, you really don't prefer Black people, or you really don't prefer Asian people. So those tools are out there in the training and development world, which is kind of my world. So I was wondering if you do those tests, Chief, and you see someone is way off the charts, who coaches them or helps them unlearn some of the unconscious bias so that they're not a hazard to your community?
We do not do that assessment that you just spoke about. What was it called again?
IAT test. IAT, implicit access test. I'll make sure I get Arleana some information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Arleana?
Yes, Clarence.
The chief said something earlier, and I think we missed it. He said that this is a human, what am I trying to say? It's human. He says that sometimes the police department and sheriff's department hires human people. Therefore, therefore some of the agencies will end up getting bad apples. What we saw in Minneapolis the other day were bad officers, period. But what I want to say is, being in law enforcement for the 18 years I was there, and also the law enforcement, they train their officers. They train them. You can get all the training in the world, but if you're ugly inside, that training will not do. And what we are seeing is people who have been trained, but inside they are ugly. And he said a human element. That's what I'm trying to say. So we could talk about policy all day. We can talk about procedure all day. We can talk about psychological tests all day. If you see an officer do something, call that department. Get that officer's name, call that department, and submit a complaint against him or her. Because that's the only way we're going to get these bad officers off the street. And believe me, there are some there, and the department wants you to call them. So we will not have what we had the other day. Or, like I said, I was in law enforcement for 18 years, and I got stopped by law enforcement because of the color of my skin. I live out here in Southwest Bakersfield, and as soon as I leave my house, I get followed by the security out here. It's a mindset.
So,
hey,
thank you.
We work together. Yes.
We have about 30 minutes, so if we can just compact what we want to say, we're going to go with Chief Terry, and then I think Keith, and then Traco.
Okay, I just want to respond to a couple of things. And what I said when I started out with, there's a lot of things in place that we haven't done a good enough job of sharing to the community. We're not doing everything that we can do. We're going to do more. We need to do more. But we first need to start with informing the community of what we are doing. We are tracking our stops. The Racial Identity and Profiling Act passed in California, based on the size of our agency, we don't have to start reporting, I think, until next January. But we've already begun tracking our stops and the demographics of that. So we've voluntarily participated early in that process. We have an early intervention system where it's tracking the performance and the behaviors of our officers. We track the numbers. Every time an officer there is a use of force, it is reviewed at a couple levels. And then we also track it separately. So we're looking at numbers of how many. We also look at citizen complaints. We also look at some of the other significant events that officers go to. We call it a wellness, because we know that there's a psychological effect to an officer for the varieties of traumas that they're exposed to over the course of a career. We should be paying attention to that because it's going to affect their behaviors. And so we're tracking a broad range of officer behaviors and performances to help give us some insight when we might see a little blip on the radar. Okay, why do you have 3 complaints in the last 3 years and people are saying you're using foul language? Okay, you get one, you don't really know, but you start seeing a pattern. We're putting things in place that will alert us to that, so that we can have this accountability inside the department and the accountability for the community. And so you'll hear more from me going forward with some specifics on what we are doing across most of these issues that we spoke. We have some improvement. We have more that we can do, and we'll be doing more, but I'll make sure that we begin communicating so that our community understands what we're doing now and where we can improve specifically.
And Chief Terry, I want to ask you, when you start framing that, we would like to be a part of the process, so it's not just your top 1 or 3% in your community making decisions on a community that they're not engaged in. So we would really like to have an opportunity to play a role in that. As you see today, what happened, over 500 people want to be part of the conversation, because I think the message came from people that they can relate to and understand. So we would like to participate in that. Thank you.
Okay.
Keith? You're muted. Okay. Traco?
Sure. So I like to cite one of my favorite modern philosophers, the hilarious Chris Rock, in response to Clarence's quote or statement. He says, in some industries, you can't afford to have bad apples. He says, you can't say if you're talking about pilots, 99% of our pilots are fantastic people, but every now and then we just have one who wants to crash into a mountain. It's not okay. You have to do greater due diligence to make sure that people who are engaging with the public and their lives, it's got to be stronger in terms of the results. Also, to Chief Terry, I just had a quick question. Love to hear that things are moving forward, and I think that's wonderful. Are these reports open to the public? And if they cannot be open to the public, again, hence my recommendation for some sort of advisory council or some group, community group, that could look at some of that data. Again, I believe that the secret to success has got to be, it needs to be external to law enforcement. It's got to be not just the police department, the sheriff's department, or the DA's office. It's got to be external to all law enforcement due to the potential conflicts of interest as you all work together for the same goal. Thanks.
Arleana.
Question.
Again, Chief Terry, thank you. You did answer my question, and it goes back to my colleague, Mr. Matthews. In education, everything is data-driven now. We know specifically what child and what seat is not getting the information they need based on certain data. So if you are able to have a database of officers when they're on, when they're having a bad day, how many times they've stopped somebody, that you can track it, how often they're stopping, what kind of demographic they're stopping, and begin to put some policies or something in place to say because there are also warning signals when there's going to be a problem. The same guy everybody can't be wrong, Chief.
Right.
So there's got to be something in place that lets an officer or a commanding officer know, Jim, you've had 4 of these in the last 6 months. What's going on with you? So that we can begin to get ahead of it before we have a tragedy that we saw last week. So I'm glad to hear that we have a data-driven, but again, I don't believe the police can police themselves. There needs to be an external force or an external body to take a look at the data so they can come in and interpret it and give you all the recommendations that are necessary.
Thank you for that. It is 2:36. Our goal is to end on time. We have a lot of people in the chat room who want to ask questions. I want to do something. I know a lot of people came in with the intent to listen deeply. And the question that I consistently hear is, what do African Americans want? We know this problem also affects our brown brothers and sisters as well, our poor white brothers and sisters as well. This is a global pandemic, but this conversation is shaped around African Americans. So I want you to answer that question for those who's listening. They want to, how can we help? What do you want? And so I'm going to start from the bottom. Be brief, be precise, hit the point. We have a few minutes, and we want to try and open our chat for the last 5 minutes or so. And Karina, we're communicating, so we'll try and do that. So Clarence, you can go first.
Well, what I was trying to communicate is bad apple, bad cop, bad person, get rid of them. And there's ways of doing it. I'll leave it at that.
Bob, you've had a lot of conversation across the globe. What do African Americans want from your perspective?
Oh my gosh, the pain is palpable. Listen, I've lived in this city since 1986, so 34 years in Bakersfield. I mean, the elephant in the room here is the 2015 report that called us the leading large city where people are killed by law enforcement. 13.6 per million. 13.6 per million. 3.6 per million is the national average. And so I've been out there with Black Lives Matter. I've been in Martin Luther King Park, and I'm telling you, I'm hearing names. Mayor Go, I know you're in here. Chief Terry, I know you're in here. They're wondering where you are. Somebody needs to step across that line and have courage and do the right thing, because this is a community that has been down for years. There have been cross burnings since I've lived here. Come on. So, Arleana, I appreciate it. I said what I needed to say.
Thank you so much. Christina Laster.
So I want to address really quickly that I see some things that are coming through the chat about why isn't there anybody Latino on the panel. I happen to be Afro-Latina. And so, you know, I feel like when you start to talk along those lines as a community, it becomes very divisive. And, you know, by us having this discussion with regards to what has taken place historically, perpetually, and generationally with Black people doesn't take away from the Black and Brown unity that is necessary. And so that is something that I did want to say with regards to the community moving forward. I think that having that Citizens Commission is absolutely necessary. Looking at what external accountability people can be brought in or how data can be provided is absolutely necessary to start to progress moving forward. But one thing that I think that the local chief, I feel like you can do that is low-hanging fruit is how many people are actually in the community that are also police officers versus how many people are coming from outside of the community that don't understand the community that are working in the police force. And I think that that's something that needs to be looked at, discussed, and because the neighborhood knows the needs and people that live there are committed to making sure there's progress and change.
Thank you. Patrick Jackson.
Again, I would like for the chief, Mullens, Kern Go, and Rudy, Salas, and Cox to answer in response to this question. And I know what Traco brought to the table was pretty phenomenal of what we've been wanting to do of having a community police oversight committee. And so with that, the data and information cannot be shared, as City Chief Mullins has stated, because of the peace officer rights. And so I pose the question to each of you, are you willing to support the change or start the conversation of supporting the changes of the peace officer rights that will help us as a community feel a lot safer, that they cannot hide behind the rights that the officers are having? I would like direct responses to that before anybody else.
I have no problem giving a direct response since you mentioned me specifically. Mr. Jackson, I don't have any problem saying, I have no problem telling you that 100% I support honesty, openness, and transparency in law enforcement, and real transparency. The best way to be perceived as transparent is to be transparent. It is unfortunate that that law makes it look as though we're hiding something. There's a certain level of confidentiality between an employer and an employee, but police officers are doing something very special in society, something that requires a tremendous amount of trust. If we're going to ask people to trust us, we have to be trustworthy, and we have to be able to prove that we're worthy of your trust. And that is one of the things. So as far as opening that conversation toward making adjustments in that area, absolutely, 100% I support that. That's
Same here.
1421 that put us in the position that started releasing these things. I don't know. I've heard it said more than once. I've heard it said a lot that the police can't police themselves. Well, of course they can't. Nobody can police themselves perfectly, and that's absolutely. Now, do the police have a responsibility, an obligation to try? Sure they do. But does there need to be openness? Does there need to be transparency from the outside? That's why we post the number of complaints and the types of complaints and our uses of force. That's why those are available to you. That's why 1421 made the information on certain types of use of force and officer complaints available out there. They're exempt from those other circumstances that you meant from the confidentiality requirements. That's some positive change that's taken place. I want people to know how we investigate it when a police officer uses deadly force. We are the only people, police are the only people who are entrusted with the duty to take the life of another human being, a citizen, on a moment's notice. That should be held up to the absolute highest level of scrutiny. And the highest level of scrutiny does not mean a confidential report. It means something that everybody can look at and we can prove that we got it right. So I ask you to consider, we don't try to police ourselves. We put that out there. That is available to anybody who wants to look at those things. It's also reviewed by the district attorney's office. I encourage anybody to look at those things and take those into account, because there is nothing more dangerous than assuming that everything is being done right.
For the sake of time, I will say ditto. I agree.
Okay. Mayor Go?
I absolutely support reform and support what Officer Mullens said.
Assemblyman Salas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing that I'm hearing from everybody is this frustration, because it's like it keeps happening again and again. And I could tell you, even from the legislators up here in Sacramento, we get frustrated as well, because we pass like this use of force bill on police. We've passed like legislation about racial and implicit bias training that we need for our officers. Like we pass all of these measures, but we still see this, and just know that there's this level of frustration here as well. And I think that's what I'm hearing from the community and a lot of folks. But directly, Mr. Jackson, yeah, there needs to be oversight, right? Oversight and accountability. There's nothing like sunshine that disinfects a lot of different problems. And I think the community definitely needs to be a part of that. They should be a part of that. And so whether it's, I don't know, Chief, if it's through the advisory or the community panels that you have, or trying to get community folks involved in how do we provide more oversight and more accountability, I think it'll be better for our community as a whole.
I agree.
Congressman Cox. Oh, sorry. Go Chief Terry.
I was just going to say, I've had some conversations over the last several months, actually, since I've been in this interim position, on a variety of different committee type issues with the police department and the community. And so, because I think there's a broad range of things that we can improve our relationship with the community and ensuring that we're being transparent on a broad range of things that really deal with people's concerns about the police department. And so those things are ongoing with me now.
Thank you. Congressman Cox.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I know exactly what you're talking about with respect to the unions. And I want everyone to keep in mind is that, this is an administration that have said upon entering office, we're going to take the handcuffs off of law enforcement. All right. And you see what's happening today. And certainly we're doing a good job in Bakersfield. These types of conversations are exactly what we need. But please reach out to our office. We'd like to hear. I see hundreds of people asking questions, and we are there to answer the questions. And if we could have more of these forums, it would be great. But the thing about me is we're talking about the brutality right now, but I don't want to miss the larger picture about the injustice in America, where a jogger gets gunned down in the street, where a young woman gets gunned down in her home, where a man can't go and look at birds in Central Park without being accused of assault. So it's up to all of us. Yes, we can't be people of color to move past this. I mean, everyone, black, white, everyone, no matter how well-meaning we think we are, but we have to be honest and do the uncomfortable work of rooting this out. America is good. We know that we're all better than this, but we all have to start with a little self-examination and to listen to those whose lives are different from our own, so we can reach that destiny that ends with justice, compassion, and empathy that manifests itself in our lives and in the streets every day. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Congressman Cox. Traco Matthews. Oh, I'm sorry, Keith Wolaridge.
Again, thank you so much for hosting this forum. I just want Chief Terry and Assistant Chief Mullens to know I love this community, but I don't feel safe in my community. As an African-American male, an elected official, school board member, my job is to look after children for their protection. I would ask that you listen to the conversation today. I don't feel safe. That man looked like me. That could have been me. The police officer is not going to ask me my political persuasion. They're not going to ask me what I do for a living. They're not going to ask those questions. They're going to snatch me out the car if it goes bad, especially if it goes bad quick. Please take in consideration all that you've heard today. I love Bakersfield, but I know Bakersfield can do better. I am not anti-police, but I am anti-police brutality. And I would ask that you would just take that into consideration. Thank you, gentlemen, for listening.
Thank you, Keith. Traco Matthews.
Absolutely. And ditto to what Keith said. I don't feel safe as a professional Black man in this community, frankly, in any community. I travel to other communities in California and still don't feel safe because of things that I have experienced, my wife and I have experienced. Thanks for inviting me to this conversation. I came with 3 specific asks. The first was the Citizens Commission. Thank you for the discussion we've had about that piece, and I really hope we do something with that. The second was to continue these conversations. Dialogue and communication. MLK wrote in his letter from Birmingham jail that direct action protests, kneeling, sit-ins, etc., are all designed to bring us to this point. So thank you, Chief Terry, for bringing us to this point right away of conversation, dialogue, and negotiation. This must continue. It must continue. A moral crisis demands action. This is action, and we need more action to continue forward. And then the final thing, which may be the strongest or the toughest request, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When you love someone, the changes that you make in the positive space are self-initiated. All right. If I have to be paid or forced by a gun to date my wife, we have a problem. Something is wrong in that relationship. So in the spirit of building trust and creating additional transparency and so forth, I would actually love to see BPD or any other law enforcement agency locally and everywhere else start to initiate these types of conversations and this action. That helps me to truly believe that your heart fully accepts and understands the level of moral crisis that we are in as a nation and as a community. When you start to initiate different behaviors yourself, then I know it's real love and trust is restored and reestablished. I do believe in this community. I have hope, and I'm committed to helping in the process of continuing the conversation, negotiation, oversight, et cetera. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Traco. Tahlua?
Leadership is a choice. It is not a rank, it's not a position, but it is a decision. And we must act swiftly to address the concerns of the community. I am newly elected, and I am looking to all of my elders and everybody who have been in positions for a long time as a way to move forward. And I don't want to lose hope. I don't want to lose hope on the people who serve in our community. So the community is asking that something be done now. And I would like to thank you, Arleana, for inviting me. I'm only 36. I have so much more to learn. Thank you so much.
Arnita?
Yes, I'm a leadership person, and so I so appreciate the leaders for taking the time to be on this call today, because in every system, leaders set the tone. That's just the way it goes. So to answer your question, Arleana, what do African Americans want? Well, we want decentered whiteness in the systems. That's what we want. We want the systems and the paradigms and the procedures and the policies to be inclusive of us in decentered whiteness or white supremacy. I'm just going to say it really out loud because I don't live in Bakersfield, but I just think that's good counsel to everyone. So that's what African American people want. We want you to chip away at the paradigms that keep us oppressed and that make us the victim, make us look different when you pull us, stop us over. So to look at the systemic issues that go way back, they just have to be chipped at. But I think that's where you go. And also a community focus group is always good to keep the pulse of any system for a leader.
Thank you. And I'll answer that question as well. I'm someone who loves passionately in my community. I love my community. I work tirelessly in my community. I believe in so much good in our community. I have people who love me across the board in my community. But I have not felt the love of my community back. What do African Americans want? They want the exact same thing every other citizen wants. I want to not be fearful of my life. I don't want to have to fear a system that has oppressed my people for so long. I want you to fight the same way you would fight for your own equality or ours. I want you to join forces with me and help me in the Southeast area where many African Americans reside, what system that has forgotten them for more than 30 years. I want you to fight. That's what I want. I want you to have laws changed. I want you to bring us to the table. I want you to diversify your tables because you can't represent a voice if it's not there. I've saw the systematic racism in Kern County as it relates to our leadership, and it hasn't been effective. I want change. What Chief Terry did today, I respect him on another level. I will roll my sleeves up and fight with him because what he has said and shown today is leadership in a way that I have not saw in our leaders. I'm sorry, I have not saw it. I saw passivity. I saw quietness. I saw you hiding behind. I need you to get out in the front and fight the way that we're fighting. You may not protest. I haven't protested. It's COVID-19. I'm a mother to 2 sons. That's my primary concern. This is my way of protesting. It's uncomfortable. I know people are going to listen to this and condemn us because no one's ever going to be happy. I've already started getting the emails, people upset because they can't get on here. You know, they're saying you only have select few on there. You only have to delete. But we have to be willing to get hit in order for change. That's what African Americans want. Exactly what you want. So when you think about us, think about yourself. We are human just like you. We want to thrive just like you. We want our children to do well and have opportunities just like you. So when you ask yourself, what can I do? What do African Americans want? Think about yourself. We're the same. Chief Terry, I'm gonna let you have the last words because we are on time. And I just want to say thank you. I'm extremely grateful to your leadership during these times that many may not have taken this. You didn't know what we were going to talk about. You didn't know what you were going to get hit with, but you came in as a leader and you were willing to take whatever we brought to you. So thank you.
I appreciate the time. And again, thank you very much for the early morning phone call and the conversation that we had, because you had a voice in that moment when you were emotional, when you were concerned, when you were afraid. And I was glad that I was able to answer the phone for you. And that's what I see our job as police officers and as a police department, that in a moment of need, that when they call us, we're going to come. We're going to come quickly. We're going to be skilled. We're going to be able to provide for your safety and deal with the immediate issue that you're dealing with without any hesitation or levels of service, depending on where you live and what color of your skin is. We talk about internally on our in the department, we talk about, look at your badge, look at your patch. You serve the city of Bakersfield. You serve everyone, and you have that responsibility to do that. So I would say to everyone here and to our community, you're going to be hearing more from us. We want to get better. I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm here to have a conversation, and I will always listen. And I'm interested in doing better. I know that Assistant Chief Mullens and he and I share the same heart. We know we can get better and get better for everybody. And that's what I want to do.
Thank you. I want to take this time. I want to thank our elected officials for joining the conversation. I want to sincerely apologize to those that we weren't able to open the mic up to. We intend on continuing this because you've asked for it. We are at about 3 o'clock. We have about 3 minutes. If anyone want to have an opportunity to share their heart, I think if we open the mic up, it's not going to be productive because we're not going to be able to get enough people. We're going to print out the questions and we're going to try and address them. And we're going to continue to try and partner with you, Chief Terry. Yes, Chief Terry.
I would just say to everybody, the questions that you get, send them to me. And we are putting together some responses to it. So there will be a response from us.
Thank you.
I want to echo that. I think that we underestimated how long it would take for members of the panel to speak, and we have done a poor job of responding to the questions that were sent in to us, either by chat or by email. So we apologize for that. The technology and the limitations of the way things are being done right now makes it difficult for us to do that. We've got almost 300 people in the room at a given time. If everybody tried to speak at once, we wouldn't get much done. So we've been able to hear from a few people today. We promise you this is not the last community meeting. I not going out on a limb here, although Chief Terry's my boss, I don't think I have any trouble committing to doing regular Zoom meetings, and not just with the two of us, but also with other members of the police department command staff. And I think you deserve to hear from other officers within the police department as well. It's not just a couple of people at the top. A police department is a lot of people all working together, and I want you to know each and every one of us. I do want to address just one last thing that I know that the community wants more input, wants more control over how their police department is run. One of the things Chief Terry has dedicated himself to is exactly that. We recently had a selection board for the police captain, which is a ranking position in the police department, in charge of, every one of them is in charge of over 100 people. And the makeup of that board was a local pastor from the Compassion Community or Compassion Christian Center, an ethics professor from Cal State University, Bakersfield, and the head of one of our local nonprofits, along with myself. So I had one vote out of 4, and the other 3 were members of our community who give us their direct input, who have not just input, but control over the one of the highest promotions that takes place within the police department. I see that as one of our first steps. And I'm saying that because when I call some of you and ask you to be on a board, I hope you'll say yes. Thank you.
Thank you. You've called them to action. So we're going to compile a list that we're going to share with you, just the members that's on this panel, Chief Terry, and I'll get that to you and we'll continue the dialogue. Again, thank you everyone who's joined. We are at 3 o'clock. We appreciate your time, and this Zoom call is officially over.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ian Day from North Texas.
Thank you to everybody.
Appreciate you guys. God bless you.
Same to you.
You as well. Take care.